Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham. What if I told you that California is passing a bill in order to make it a felony to investigate and uncover fraud and then post the results of your investigations online? That would be crazy, right? What kind of regime would we be living under if that was the case? Well, unfortunately for us, our legislature is trying to pass a bill that would do exactly that. And this time they are once again hiding behind immigration rights and protecting the vulnerable in order to pass a much more sinister agenda. We are diving deep into all of it today. But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. And if you want more information or you want sources cited in compiling today's episode, then you should check out the corresponding article on my website, which is linked below. Okay, so we have a very important and very spicy topic to talk about today, and that is a new bill that is making its way through our legislature that I believe that you and every Californian needs to be aware of. And so let's just start from the very beginning. What is this bill? Who has introduced it? And what would it supposedly do? This is Assembly Bill 2624, and it was introduced by Mia Bonta. Now, you might recognize that last name, and that's because she is the wife of our Attorney General, Rob Bonta, who I have talked about quite frequently. It turns out she's also an assembly member and she represents the East Bay area. And so she introduced this bill, and it is titled the Privacy for Immigration Support Services Providers. Now, what she says the intent is, and what the bill is worded to say the intent is to protect people who provide services to immigrants from threats or harassment. And so basically the bill is designed to do three main things. The first thing is address confidentiality. And so anyone who is providing designated immigration support services, so that could be helping with housing, that could be helping with healthcare, just anything that is helping immigrants in California, anyone who provides those services can conceal their addresses, both personal and their business addresses, from being posted on the internet if they have experienced harassment or any sort of threats. And so basically what the proponents of this bill are saying is that this is very narrowly defined, that it's only in cases where people have actually experienced harassment that they can then apply for a program in our Justice Department to have their address concealed. And it's not restricted just to their personal home addresses. It's also could umbrella the addresses of the businesses that they work for, businesses that are obtaining taxpayer dollars as their funding. So that's the first thing that it would do, is that address confidentiality. The second thing that it would do is it would make it illegal then for anyone to obtain or share that personal information and then post it on the internet. And so if someone is part of the program where their address is confidential, you then cannot go posting on Instagram about this business or the person who works there. And the bill goes so far as not just saying address, telephone number, personal information, but also pictures. So posting pictures of that person or pictures of the location on the internet. That would make it a crime. And so then the third thing that follows is it imposes penalties. It makes this a felony. So if you are to violate this bill by posting that information online, then that would be a felony offense, and you would be charged with a fine up to $50,000. And so those are pretty strict punishments on people who would violate this. So what you're likely wondering is, where does this come from? What's the purpose of this? I mean, it says the purpose is to support these people who are providing services to immigrants and to protect them from any sort of harassment. So what's been going on lately that has made this an issue that legislators feel like they need to actually address? Well, it all circles back to many of the things that we've been talking about week after week, and that is recent investigations into fraud, waste, and abuse through taxpayer-funded programs in our state as well as across the country. So let's just set the scene of what's been happening. There has been rampant fraud that has been committed, not just by California, but across the country in other states. And the first place that we saw this really being publicized was in Minnesota. And so we talked about that. We talked about how Nick Shirley went in, he exposed the daycare fraud. There were other fraud schemes that were exposed as well as a result of his investigation. And so what we're seeing, the pattern of having happened, is that mainstream media, news outlets, or other types of investigators or journalists have ignored this for years. So there have been all of these schemes going on, and no one has looked into it, no one has asked questions, and no one has held our leadership accountable. And so recently, there have been some, like Nick Shirley, who have been committed to uncovering these schemes. And so he goes in. He sees for himself. Is this a daycare? Are there children playing here? Do parents come and sign their children up? If I come in and say, I want to sign up my son, can I do that? And what he has found is that in Minnesota, at least, he wasn't able to do that because a lot of the places that were registered daycares and that were receiving taxpayer funds were not actually daycares. And so then he takes that work, he takes those findings, and he posts them on YouTube or on social media for the effect of trying to make change. So he's not doing it for harassment or threats or any sort of that kind of outcome. He's doing it to try to make change in the government to show we should have stricter controls here and we should be rooting out fraud. Because at the end of the day, taxpayers are paying these people who are just taking the money and running with it and are not providing the services that they are supposed to be providing. Now, this has bled over into California because California is a circus when it comes to money management. We know that there is so much rampant just waste of money. If it's not evil and just a wicked, then it's incompetent. So if people are not trying to misspend money or abuse the taxpayer funds that they've received, then they are just foolish in how they are actually spending the money. And we've seen that with the high-speed rail. We've seen that with the $30 billion that went to the homelessness crisis that has only gotten worse. We have seen that with how we funded free healthcare for illegal immigrants and that ballooned to $9 billion and put us in a budget deficit. So we don't spend money effectively, and our lawmakers do not allow for money to be spent in a way that is transparent to the taxpayer. And so Nick Shirley has come into California and he has been doing similar investigations. He has also been looking into the hospice fraud that we talked about on the show a couple weeks ago. If you didn't watch that video, you should definitely check it out because it is just insane, the type of waste that is happening in our government for these hospice centers. So he's been going and showing up and taking videos and posting them online. And then that's how we know that this is going on, because otherwise it is just completely covered up and glossed over. But our lawmakers, our Democratic leadership, who is over us here in California, does not like that because they don't like their own programs, their own waste, their own mismanagement being exposed. They want those things to stay in the dark. They don't want people asking questions. And so what this bill does is it reclassifies those activities from investigation now to harassment. And so here's the problem. If any public organization that is receiving taxpayer funds can just claim harassment so that they are not in any danger of someone coming and finding out how they are abusing those funds that they're getting from the government, that is going to create a very real barrier between citizen journalism and the type of public records investigation that is happening. That is what uncovers this type of fraud. And so instead, the fraud will be continuing. It will just be able to run rampant with no one able to look into it, because the second that you look into it, the second that you show up and you ask a question, now that organization can report you for bullying, for harassment, for threats, for intimidation. And now you can be charged with a felony. And the bill actually speaks to its restrictive nature. So the legislators who are behind this bill recognize that this is not constitutional, that they actually should not be able to be as restrictive with what you are allowed to go and do out in the public arena. And so they say, quote, "This act imposes a limitation on the public's right of access to the meetings of public bodies or the writings of public officials and agencies." But then what they do is they argue that the safety aspect actually outweighs your right to be able to do things. So it is even addressing that this is borderline unconstitutional, that this is walking the line when it comes to silencing speech, but they're willing to do that for the sake of, quote, safety. And that is exactly why it is important for us to be informed about it. Because when you look at this is not about safety and it's not about immigration. If you look at the investigations, they're not about immigration at all. Someone like Nick Shirley is going out because he is trying to uncover fraud. Now, some of those fraud schemes have included immigrant populations, but just because it includes immigrants does not mean that immigrants or providers of immigrant services are being purposefully targeted or harassed. It just means that in the schemes that have been perpetuated, that those groups happen to be some groups that are involved in perpetuating them. But that's not racist. That's not discriminatory in order to uncover. If you are not involved in any sort of fraud, you will not be found out and exposed. If you are included or involved in fraud, then that will be uncovered and exposed. It does not matter your ethnic group. It does not matter if you are an immigrant. Just don't commit fraud. But it's also dangerous because this bill is, again, categorizing Shirley's activities as well as other journalistic activities like this and saying that they're harassment. But no one is harassing anyone. Even if you watch the videos, if you watch the investigations done to expose the fraud schemes happening, there is no harassment or bullying or threats going on. If anything, the people who are being asked questions about their organizations, questions about their hospice organizations here in LA County, they refuse to answer questions. They dodge the question. They intimidate. They try to circle Shirley so that he feels so intimidated he won't continue asking questions. But Shirley is not calling on anyone to harass these people or these businesses. What he is doing is saying these businesses are wasting taxpayer dollars. And then people are rightly outraged at the fact that their money is being wasted and they're turning to be angry at their government. But the government doesn't like that. They don't like their deeds being exposed. So now they're just going to blatantly say that it is just harassment. So to paint this as a picture of evil journalists out to harass immigrant communities is just literally insane. Like, it is mentally unwell because of how far from the truth that it is. And our government shouldn't be responding this way. Our government should care about the money that they're wasting. Our government should care that there are bad actors at play and they should take steps to root them out and to stop funding corruption. So the fact that instead they are now rushing to pass a bill that will defend the very people who are wasting our money, pretty telling of their priorities. So here's something that's very important for us to understand, especially in California. Politicians are very good liars. They're really good at spinning up a narrative. And we, as the public, we as the taxpayer, we as thinking people must be shrewd enough to see through their deception, because it is really easy to cloak your ill intent, to disguise it as protecting the vulnerable or as having some sort of purpose. And honestly, in any sort of authoritarian regime, it's not like people just pass laws that blatantly say, we are going to shut down your rights. We are going to make it so that you can't live free lives here. They always pass laws with what seems like reasonable purposes. They always have explanations. They always have why there's some sort of interest that outweighs your rights, your freedoms, your abilities to do things. And so you just need to continue trusting them as the power to tell you what is good for you, to tell you what will keep you safe, to tell you what will actually protect the vulnerable. But the ways that we see through this deceptive narrative is we take a clear look at their hypocrisy and we look at their track record. Because if California legislators want to claim that they want to protect the vulnerable here, they want to protect people from being harassed and from being threatened, all we have to do is look at their track record on how they have protected the vulnerable in every single other instance. And so if we look at California, we very obviously see that they do not care about protection. They only care about power, and they care about pushing forward their narrative of what they believe is right. Because who is the most vulnerable among us? Probably the unborn, right? Little tiny babies in their mother's wombs. And we have seen that they have continued time and time again to rail for abortion rights. They do not care at all. They only look at empathy for the woman who is in a situation where she doesn't want to have a baby. They don't care at all about the baby. Or what about children and looking at their education, their upbringing, look at their parents' abilities to raise their children? Well, California says that teachers should just have the right to teach them whatever worldview that they believe, that parents are abusers, that if they don't agree with the narrative that California spins up, then parents shouldn't have the right to continue parenting their children, that they should have information hidden from them. Or what happens when those children grow up and they try to live and thrive in their communities and then they are being raped and murdered by criminals, but California doesn't put those criminals behind bars. We repeatedly release people. We don't give them felony charges, or we reduce the law so that they can have criminal behavior and they can just be let out again and again. We don't want to put people in prisons because we say that the prisons are overcrowded. And so we just release them as a matter matter of policy while shutting down prisons. How is that protecting the vulnerable? As a state, we take the policies that defend people being in our country illegally, even when there are people in our country illegally who have criminal records and come from gangs in other countries and only come to drug traffic, to commit crimes, and to do further harm. We incentivize and encourage mass homelessness by not taking any sort of steps to actually clean up the problem and address the underlying drug crime that actually pushes forward a lot of the homelessness in our state. And then on top of all of that, we just jack up the cost of living into oblivion so that it is so impossible for anyone to live here that hardworking, tax-paying people feel the effects when they try to go to the grocery store, when they try to buy a home, when they try to take care of their families, while at the same time, we just hand out social welfare benefits like they're candy to anyone and everyone who lives here. So over and over and over again, our state has proven to be ruthless against people who are good, ruthless against trying to actually do what is morally just. And instead, they have further perpetuated policies and further perpetuated laws that actually promote what is evil. And so we cannot be naive. We cannot look at the track record of all that they have done in our state and then turn around and read this bill and go, well, maybe it's for a good purpose. Maybe they really are trying to protect people who have been harassed. No, we are not going to let them lie to our faces through their teeth while they stab us in the back. And so we need to ask more and more questions. When they say that this is about safety, when they say that this is about protecting people, then we need to ask, who is being protected and what are they being protected from? If this really is an issue of safety, safety of who? What danger are they in? And then we need to push back against the narrative that asking questions and doing investigation into fraud schemes is harassment. That is not true. It is delusional to say that you showing up to ask a few questions makes you now someone who is a harasser. The taxpayer should be able to ask questions and the government should be able to provide answers. And so you should be able to go somewhere that is being funded by the money that you pay and to ask, what services do you provide here? And if it is a legitimate business that is actually using taxpayer money for the purposes that it said that it would, then you will very quickly see, oh, there are people being helped here. There are services being provided. Whether or not I agree with those services being provided is not at hand here in the matter. Instead, just are you doing what you have told the state that you are going to do? I see that and now I can move on. You should be able to ask questions about that. But when you show up and you are not providing any services, when it is shut down buildings, when it is just empty fronts, and there's no one even answerable or accountable, they just have signs that say this is a hospice center, but it's clearly not. When we have hundreds of hospice centers just located on one street, why are we not allowed to ask questions? Why is that harassment? Why is that threatening people? It is not. And so we need to stand up to say, no, it's not. The implications of this bill are wrong. The intent here is wrong because it is non-existent. And yet at the same time, we aren't really surprised because this comes from the same party who says that if you say that there are two genders and that men are men and women are women, that is violence. Well, we can't live in a society like that. People can't just cry wolf and say that every single thing is violence and we immediately lay down. We are not going to let people intimidate us into no longer speaking up for what is true because we might be called threatening or harassers or racist or violent. Those words don't hold any meaning anymore if we just let people use them willy-nilly with no care for their actual definitions. It is not violent to ask a question. It is not harassment to do an investigation. That is what investigative journalists have done for hundreds of years, since they were a thing. They go and they investigate. And how do they do it? They ask questions. But the inability to contend with ideas that you don't like, with realities that you don't like, leads you down a path to where we have ended up now in California, where we outlaw freedoms that are inconvenient for us, and we restrain the freedoms and outlaw speech just because we don't like what they are actually resulting in. But there is one more thing that we have to look at with this bill, because I talked about hypocrisy, but it's not just about the fact that California has not protected the vulnerable. It's also about the fact that California has not cared in other very similar instances where there have been real attempts to actually threaten, intimidate, and harass other groups of people, namely ICE agents. Because we have actually had real cases of protesters turning violent and trying to dox, threaten, and intimidate ICE officers out of California so that they don't do their jobs. We've seen this time and time again. So much so that ICE agents have been having to wear masks in order to hide their identities because the crime against them has just risen significantly, especially in sanctuary states and cities like California and like Los Angeles. But what have our legislators done about that issue? Have they come out and said the violence against ICE officers is absolutely unacceptable? And so we are passing legislation that says that if you dox or harass an ICE agent, that is a felony and that you could be charged a fine up to $50,000? No. Instead, they passed Senate Bill 627 that said that ICE officers are no longer able to wear masks in California because they need to be proud of their actions and they need to stand up for what they think is right. And so they have continued to say, well, we are hands off with these protesters. People have freedom of speech. If they're not happy with ICE, then ICE should look at their own actions. And then what's even worse is that on top of that, we've had our own representatives, for example, Representative Salud Carbajal, who engage in this actual doxing, harassment, threatening, and intimidation themselves because they don't agree with ICE agents. And so it came out that this representative actually doxed ICE agents to give them more information about agents who were involved in a legal raid that they were conducting on a farm in Camarillo that we have an episode about as well, and that he supported and joined in the protests. The protests turned violent, and ICE officers actually went to the emergency room because of the injuries that they sustained as a result. And so where was Mia Bonta for any of that? Where was Mia Bonta with her bill that says protection for immigration enforcement officers, that says, I don't agree with what ICE is doing, but they shouldn't be harassed for it. They shouldn't have their locations of their hotels literally posted all over social media by these protesters, because now they are showing up to their hotels and they are throwing rocks at them and they are trying to intimidate them so that they don't go out and actually conduct the raids that are legal under our federal law. Where was she then? She was nowhere because this is hypocrisy. They don't actually care. They only care about the people who align with them ideologically and politically. And then on top of that, they only care about protecting the type of fraud and the type of criminal behavior that they have perpetuated in our legislature because they don't want to be held accountable for it. Now, Nick Shirley himself has responded to this bill because even though it is actually technically called AB 2624, it is being called the Stop Nick Shirley Act. And so he responded and he said, quote, they're literally willing to impose a fine or imprisonment if you go and seek to find out the truth about a location that could potentially be fraudulent inside your own neighborhood. And that's exactly what is happening with this bill. There are no questions about it. It's insane. And on top of that, it is clear the motive that is at play here because who is introducing it? The literal wife of the Attorney General, which means that California is signaling, they are flagging that they are willing to put the full force of the Department of Justice here in our state behind investigating and going after these journalists who they disagree with on a political, ideological level. And so they're just trying to make it so that you and I don't want to go out there because we might get in trouble. You might show up and take a video of somewhere showing there's nobody here and they receive billions of dollars in funding or millions of dollars in funding each month, and no one is running this place. But if you post that and they claim harassment, now you are going to be slapped with a felony, a charge that they literally don't even give criminals in our state. It is so hard to get a felony here in California, but it's not hard if you're conservative. It's not hard if you're pro-life. And now it's not hard if you are a conservative journalist. But here's the thing. This is America. We are not going to let them throw journalists in prison for uncovering fraud and uncovering the deeds of evil that they do in the darkness. We are not going to let that stand. And we're not going to let that stand because we're not going to be fooled by the type of motives that they claim are behind it. We're not going to let them just talk and talk and talk and spin things into a way that sounds really positive and like they're trying to do a good thing. We are going to uncover clearly what their purposes and motives are. And we are not going to let California turn into a North Korean state where you can't even criticize the government for fear that you are going to be thrown in prison. We will not do that. You and I are not going to do that. Decline is never obvious in the moment with each specific bill, but we have to remain vigilant. We have to wake up out of complacency and we have to hold them accountable and refuse to continue voting for these people who would strip us of every single freedom just to get what they want. And so that is what we are going to continue to do. That is the message that we are going to continue to spread because we see precisely what is at stake with this bill. And for the sake of our country, for the sake of our state, and for the sake of our freedoms, we are not going to be deceived by it. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state and that you even learned something new. If you love this show, please spread the word and share it with your friends, family, and fellow Californians. And I'll see you back here next week for another episode of the California Conversation.